Hi, everybody. Time for episode 9 of Extra Credit, Morning Kombat Extra Credit. This is where I take a look at some of the fights that we did not get a chance to get to on regular MK. My name is Luke Thomas. I, of course, am one half of Morning Kombat. Brian Campbell will be back on Wednesday and Friday's show. All right, so for today, we have 5 fights to get to from the weekend. I got a couple of shout-outs I'll get to as well. But for the 5 fights we're going to get to, it looks as follows. Brad Riddell taking on Rafael Fiziev. Chris Curtis versus Brendan Allen. Manel Kape taking on Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And then Jeremy Kennedy taking on Emmanuel Sanchez from Bellator. It's the one Bellator fight I'll get to. And then Cheyanne Vlismas taking on Mallory Martin. A couple of honorable mentions we'll get to with Buchecha, Clay Guida, and some other ones. But that's it for today. Okay? So thumbs up on the video. Hit subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into some of these results. So Brad Riddell is defeated by Rafael Fiziev in a hell of a fight. He wins at 2:28 of the third round with a spinning wheel kick. What was the story of this fight? Of course, I'm not breaking it down in great detail. I'm sort of watching them once or twice and then giving you a bit of an overview. So I always encourage you to, if there's an analyst out there that you trust who gives you good information, to go look further into it. But a couple of the things that sort of looked that way to me as a contributing factor to the success was Riddell, by the way, looked huge in this fight. He looked like he was in tremendous physical condition for whatever that is worth. It obviously didn't affect the outcome in the end, but something to be noted. He's always been in good shape. He looked like he put on some noteworthy muscle in his time off since his last contest. But the big thing for me was Fiziev looked a little bit faster, and that was aided by the fact that it looked like that some of the setups that Riddell was trying to either close distance or to fool Fiziev, they just didn't really work all that well all the time. Obviously, some of the stuff got through, but if you just noted, Fiziev's face was marked up by the end, but there was a big cut over the left side of the face / eye of Riddell, and then under the right side. There was a lot of like looping hooks that Fiziev was able to score at the end of combinations or at the end of some kind of blitz or charge that Riddell was trying to attempt. And Riddell might get something through. It wasn't like none of the punches were landing, but in the end, it didn't look like Fiziev was ever caught with his guard down super clean, or that he didn't have some kind of a sense about what was coming. And then you aid in the fact that he's got such dexterity with his body control, right? He is very good about leaning back or getting off to the side or whatever, and then he throws punches in quick succession. The combination of the speed and being not fooled by what was being attempted, either the feints, the fakes, or whatever, the blitzes from Riddell, the two in concert allowed him to counter-strike, basically. It was weird, right? Because he was pressuring Riddell backwards, so he was the one leading, but then he was kind of waiting for Riddell to do something to then counter. So it was a leading with the pressure, countering with the striking, and in general, it just looked like he was not fooled. He was able to more or less, discern what was coming his way and then react around it. Neither guy, except for the final shot, obviously, neither guy landing the most significant kicks either way. Sort of another contributing factor here is, obviously we got to it on regular MK, but when speaking about Horiguchi versus Pettis from the weekend, one of the realities is if there's a lot of space, they can back up a certain direction, they can go back up at certain angles. There's just a lot of room they can use to get out of a bad situation or just a situation that they don't necessarily like. When you're backed up against the fence, your options become much narrower, and the things you can do with your body become narrower. Like even in kickboxing or boxing, you can lay on the ropes to get your head outside of the sort of plane that is defined by the rope line. In MMA, you can't. Like once you go up against the cage, you are stopped. There's no further motion. Similarly, if you're sort of trapped against the cage, you can go one direction or the other. And I guess Fiziev must have made a read that, or either immediately or he had kind of anticipated it, that when Brad peels off after an exchange to the right, to his own right, to Fiziev's left, that he would be setting himself up for a potential kick upstairs. I don't think. Obviously, Riddell is a very decorated kickboxer, a very good one. He didn't see it coming. I don't think there was a lot of telegraphing about it. It just came upstairs. I think that Riddell thought it was going to go to the body, and so his hand had kind of come down, and it made it even more exposed in the end. But it was interesting. Like Riddell was trying to feint his way out of trouble, or feint his way into something, or fake his way. And again, he was landing. I want to pull up the numbers here if I can here very quickly. just to be sure. But, again, don't trust the numbers on the broadcast live. They're going to do you no good. But in terms of the actual fight metric numbers, here is what Fiziev came up with. He had pretty close in numbers. Attempted significant strikes, 123 for Fiziev, 115 for Riddell, 66 landing for Fiziev, 59 landing for Riddell. Riddell was landing. In the first round, he actually barely outlanded him. He got outlanded himself in the second, Riddell did, and he was getting outlanded in the third before the stop. A couple of things to mention in this contest. It's interesting. If you're as good of a kickboxer as Brad Riddell is, you would probably be tempted to put that as the centerpiece of your game. But what was kind of interesting to me was he attempted a takedown in the second, didn't get it. He did get a takedown, Riddell did, in the third. And it just seems to me like I just wonder what might else could have been there, right? Like, it was even-ish on the feet. Maybe Fiziev's quicker hand speed and the fact that he was able to mostly anticipate what was coming was a bit of a difference maker. But, round over round, it wasn't a huge difference maker. And I wonder if, not that Fiziev is probably easy to take down to the ground, but it looked to me like if Riddell had another gear where his wrestling was, it appeared to be quite strong, but just a little bit stronger. I wonder what that might have done for his fortunes, because maybe you could say that they were somewhat even between the first two rounds, depending on how you scored it. Heading into the third, if Riddell had secured top control and was able to work from there, I wonder how that could have changed his fortunes a little bit. Like, in other words, if you're Israel Adesanya, you can have good defensive sensibilities about how to protect yourself as it relates to someone wanting to offensively wrestle you, but the rest of your game is so strong, you can kind of lord it over your opposition. Here in the case of Riddell, when you got a guy like Fiziev who is pretty much your match in that department, at least in terms of MMA kickboxing, certainly, you need to have like another gear to go to potentially to make the difference. Like, the difference between them standing is not so significant that you like your chances to win, or that in this case, obviously, you lost. It's easier for me to be like, oh, just have your wrestling get better. I don't mean to say this is some easy thing, but rather just sort of thinking about like your competitive advantages as it relates to the rest of the field. In most cases, Riddell is going to be able to lord his kickboxing over his contemporaries en route to a win. But in the case of Fiziev, that was not enough. And it did look to me like there was some interesting possibilities with the wrestling if there was a little bit more there to lean on. So, how you apportion your training and what kind of game you pursue, these are actually a little bit more complex of a questions than I can faithfully represent to you here when the corner has to think about it. But, I think a guy like, take your pick about who's Anderson Silva, it doesn't make a lot of sense for him to look for takedowns in his prime, right? Because he had enough of an advantage over his peers. But if that advantage had disappeared a little bit, now what do you do? Now how do you assess what's the best way to pursue your game? Riddell looked like he had pretty strong, good timing on the takedown that he got, really good timing on it, authoritative. Didn't quite turn his hips over just enough to get it fully, but it was pretty good. Something to think about for the future. I think if you can lean into that a little bit, your kickboxing's already pretty great. Bring that part of the game along, and who knows, even if it don't get the takedown, you can do a little bit more to deter potential future opponents. So it was a nice win by Fiziev. It's just showing good composure, good reaction, good reads. Some of that maybe have come together from some experience that they had in their past, but pretty impressive just the same. All right, so we go to the second fight of the two. This one was very interesting to me. Chris Curtis taking on Brendan Allen. I thought Brendan Allen was going to win this one, not because I thought Chris Curtis was some kind of bad fighter. Far from it. I actually think Chris Curtis is pretty talented. But he was taking it on short notice, and I'm like, well, Brendan Allen's very well-rounded, and Curtis is taking this on short notice. This is probably not the best circumstance under which to get a win, but MMA is crazy, and that's exactly what he got. I was surprised by Brendan Allen's strategy in this one a little bit. It looks to me, and I have no way of knowing if this is true, it looks to me like Brendan Allen is between different stages of his game in terms of growth development. Like, it's all heading in the right direction, but he hasn't quite figured out all of the different ways in which he wants to put his game together for this newer stage. And so some of the pieces aren't aligning as best they could and should. I think that they will over time. Again, I can't be sure about that. Maybe someone who's close to him would say, "Oh, that's not quite right." Fair enough. Like I don't know this. I'm only making a guess based on what we can observe. But it just looks to me like he is leaving part of his old game behind and developing into the newer one, and that hasn't fully set in. And so there's just some inconsistencies about how the game is built together. Didn't do a lot of feinting. Brendan Allen didn't do a lot of faking, a lot of level changing to get Chris Curtis reacting to him. They was more just trying to time or angle off to certain ways to get a strike going. And the defense wasn't quite as sturdy as it needed to be. You saw him have a hand up here, and then his other lead hand was kind of down here. And that's fine if you can roll into the punch, but if you can't quite roll into it, either for MMA purposes or you're just not that good at that position, you know, it can lead to a fair amount of problems. It's not quite Philly shell, but something approximating it. And notice the way that Curtis, typically an open stance, was able to get ahead of it. What he did was he went to the body, angle off, and to the head, or angle off to the body and to the head. So in the final combination, notice how he set it up. They're open stance. There's a jab that comes from Allen. What Curtis ends up doing is he parries it, then comes over the top, and as he comes over the top after the parry, then he switches, he takes a wide angle on him, an even further outside angle, then goes to the body. Now, when he goes to the body, understand something. So Curtis was standing, I think, in southpaw, right? I believe that's right. So the jab is coming. He parries it, goes over the top. As he goes over the top, he angles out even more. Then he throws the left to the body. And when he goes the left to the body, understand what that does to his shoulders. Now his shoulders are turned this way. So he has loaded up this hook with maximum potential. And then he drives that hook over the top. And that thing landed with an absolute ton of unobstructed authority. He drilled that thing into the stomach. Into the head of Brendan Allen. And then from there just finished him off. But he was wide open. And so Brendan Allen gets his jab parried, right? So he's standing, let's see, if Curtis is left southpaw, he's standing this way. He jabs, comes over the top, then the opponent goes further to that outside angle. You know, the once you see the opponent shift, you have to address that angle. It's like someone going for an arm bar underneath. Once the angle changes, you have to know what's coming behind that. There was no real adjustment. Then the hand was down because of the body shot, and he was just wide open, man. He was completely wide open, and Curtis had loaded the shoulders to come whip around. Like, I mean, he was going to be in trouble, and of course he was. And there you have it. It was a nice read by Curtis. His team had set him up for success. He was ready to go in there. He outstruck him numerically as well. Again, for whatever that is worth, 43 significant strikes landing for Brendan Allen, 61 for Chris Curtis. Obviously, some of those are going to be the pour on at the end, but even then, dude, really, really nice reads from him. I was impressed from Chris Curtis. I remember when he won a Contender Series and then didn't get a contract. Then he went off into some sojourn into the universe and retired a couple more times. And here he is, back in the UFC, beating guys. I think Brendan Allen, if I'm not mistaken, was on Contender Series and got a contract from that. I believe, yes, he beat Aaron Jeffrey back in July of 2019. For a guy like Chris Curtis, he won on Contender Series all the way back in July of 2018. And then he makes his way to the UFC in the most unlikely of ways and then scores 2 stoppages in 2 fights over other guys who were touted prospects. Phil Hawes obviously had his own issues getting right, but you get the idea. Like, dude, talent prospecting is hard. I didn't understand why they didn't give him a run the first time, but whatever. Here he is now, and he's making absolutely the most of it. He was the better striker of the two, at least in that fight. I'm a big believer in Brendan Allen. I've seen the tape on him. He looks good when he's operating, but there just didn't seem to be, I won't say not enough urgency, there just didn't seem to be enough either camouflage of what he was doing or respecting what Curtis was doing, and enough reaction around that. Maybe just not enough safeguards in place in the game, and he paid for it. But it was a really good effort from Chris Curtis. He is off and running in his UFC campaign, so good for him. We go to Manel Kape taking on Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Dude, this was an extremely impressive from Manel Kape, who, you know, came into the UFC with a lot of hype. obviously from what he had done in Japan, but then had a bit of a inconsistent beginning. He loses to Pantoja via decision back in 2021. He loses to Mateus Nicolau, which surprised me, back with split decision. So it was back and forth back in 2021. Here he comes against Ode Osborne, who you knew Osborne was a little bit overmatched given the kind of striker that Manel Kape had been. And then Zhumagulov, who had looked good up to this point, but then he gets dusted off in a minute and, 4 minutes into the first round. The numbers are beyond impressive. Again, some of this are going to come around because of the nature of the finish, where he was just blitzing on top of him. But Manel Kape just quicker, able to make better reads. Zhumagulov had him on the back foot for a huge portion of this fight. And dude, the real takeaway from this one was, Kape's athleticism when he brings it to bear with strategy versus just sort of, using it as some kind of impressive, I won't say tool, but show of ability rather than an actual application of ability. It's extremely impressive. He ends up scoring a heavy shot along the fence line, and then you heard Michael Chiesa describe it as shoe shining, just this unloading, ba, 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 ba. I won't call it quite like Phil Baroni on Dave Manet, but impressive just the same. Seems to me he's making better choices about what punches or what shots he has to throw. There's something called shot selection in striking that you should be aware of, right? What weapons are you choosing to throw at what time? Certainly, you don't have to throw always one kind of punch or one particular punch in one scenario, but there are going to be a range of possibilities, and sometimes there'll be a very narrow range where one kind of strike is going to work better for you than the other. Like if someone is jabbing you, you have a few things you could go to. You could do some kind of an inside leg kick, depending if you want to off-balance them. You could do a body kick to counter the jab. You can parry the jab and then come over the top. These are all different choices you have to make, but they should make sense in the context of what kind of fight you're having with what your opponent is throwing or what kind of defense they are showing. And sometimes what you think might be there at the beginning of a fight, you might have to change a little bit through because they have some kind of answer for it, right? This is why the guys that have a good game plan, but then can adjust off of it, these are the ones that tend to have the best results. In the case of this fight, you go back and you watch it, Manel Kape just having really good shot selection, doing some heavy head hunting in this one because I didn't think Zhumagulov was employing a lot of good head movement along the center line, some good leg kicking to off-balance him along the way. So he was dealing with, Zhumagulov had a fair amount of pressure he was trying to apply early, and Manel Kape handled it extremely well. Super, super well. By the time the fight ended, landing a hard shot and then giving him zero room to breathe in the end. It looked to me like there was an overall letting the fight come to him kind of scenario going on with Kape, and then better shot selection. It seemed like in his first couple of UFC fights, he couldn't quite get that going for him. Granted, I do think that the guys he is beating now are not on the same level as Pantoja, but I also think that Kape had a bit of a wake-up call early that is now paying dividends as we move forward here a little bit. Moving on a little bit further down the line, this was not an exciting fight by any stretch of the imagination, but I did want to bring it up for a very important reason. Jeremy Kennedy gets the win over Emmanuel Sanchez. I think that's 3 losses in a row for Emmanuel Sanchez, which is so surprising because he was really kicking ass up until that semifinal of the Featherweight Grand Prix in Bellator, and now things have kind of fallen apart for him with his defensive wrestling. So he was doing... First of all, he's getting taken down way too much. Mads Burnell held him down, and now Jeremy Kennedy held him down. Now, Mads Burnell and Jeremy Kennedy are very good fighters, to be clear, but Emmanuel Sanchez is just too experienced at this point to have this much of a liability in his defense. You should, and I'll give him credit. He couldn't get back up, despite the fact that he was trying. So there was a lot of work he was doing underneath with elbows underneath and everything else he could do to make use of the situation. But in the end, it wasn't enough. However, here is what I will say. A couple things. One, Jeremy Kennedy found the back pretty consistently across 3 rounds, or at least on top. And in many cases, he found the back. I like that move. If you are going to go to a grappling heavy kind of decision, I don't like just working on top. I prefer guys getting to the back because it creates such asymmetry with your opponent. Your opponent has their back taken. They have everything in front of them, particularly if it's a body triangle. There's not much that they can do. I like that. However, if you notice in this fight, and if you listen to Jeremy Kennedy's corner, Eric Nixick, it seemed like a grappling control fight was what they were looking for ahead of time, which I have no in general, I have no problem with the way Jeremy Kennedy fought. The point I'm trying to make is, if you are going to get to a super advantageous position, you are courting a certain amount of risk. What do I mean by that? You're not going to face so much risk from your opponent. But if you're going to go to a grappling heavy control style of a fight, particularly if you have a body triangle from the back, it limits your mobility too. If I lock on a body triangle, I don't have a ton of things I can do. I can open up the space between my chest and their back if I do that, right? To open up some strikes from behind if I want to, or control one wrist and then go for the punch. But you got to understand something. The more space that you create between your chest and your back, it's not to say you can't have any space, but as a general rule, even with a body triangle, the more space you create between your chest and their back, the more you open up a possibility that they could begin to escape. Right? That does exist, or at a bare minimum, create problems for you in some kind of, you have control, but it's slight, or you can't do a whole lot with it. The point I'm trying to make here is, Jeremy Kennedy was looking for the choke at most times, did almost no ground and pound, but the chokes really were never very close. And so this is why I call that a risky way to fight, because on the one hand, you have such dominant control, you can tick that off the box. On the other hand, if you have that kind of dominant control and then no meaningful offense behind it, you are running the risk of the judge giving the fight to your opponent, or at least giving that round to your opponent. It's a risky way to fight, to have that amount of superior control and no corresponding offense behind it. The whole idea behind having those positions is that, yes, they're hard to get to and they matter. Your opponent is in a very, very precarious situation. But if they're in a precarious situation for 10, 12 minutes and there's nothing else behind it, well, now you have to ask, how precarious was it really? They can't put their hands down and just do nothing, because they would get their throat snatched up pretty quickly. But in a modern rules, man, if dudes want to fight on a control-heavy grappling style, fine, dude. You got to compete the way you got to compete. Like, I don't really begrudge them that. But you also have to be cognizant of the risk. Like, dude, if Emmanuel Sanchez, he got his back taken for too long, I think, to win this one. But if a couple of moments had gone a little bit differently and he had gotten his hand raised, there is no possible room for Jeremy Kennedy in that particular scenario to complain. Didn't work out that way, but could have got there. Like, easily could have got there. So he was playing with fire there a little bit. Good control, great back control. But I'm not going to say got away with one, but that is something I would not want to have to repeat unless I really had to repeat it, because a different set of judges and a slightly different opponent response could have been trouble. Also, you might be asking about the back control and getting out of it. There's a great video that Gordon Ryan put out, which is kind of amazing, where what they do to get out of the back control is, if, let's say, the belt of their legs is around your waist and the senkaku, the locking of their legs, happens around your left hip. Right? So they have body triangled. You're the opponent having your back taken. They have triangled around your left hip. The way he advocates getting out of it is, you have to switch your legs a certain way, but you have to take your right arm and go under their right knee onto the side, and that creates room for your legs to get out, which can then help you unbuckle, essentially, the triangle, and then you can begin to do whatever you need to do. I don't know how applicable to MMA that is when you're getting hit, but in a case like Emmanuel Sanchez, who is not getting hit so much from the back, and at least one hand you keep along the choking side, so then you have the other arm underneath their knee, then you swish your hips a little bit, and then you could untie the knot. All of those things could have been in play here. So something to think about for the future. I wonder what kind of responses we're going to get, because the old way was to put pressure on the foot that is being underneath the triangle, right? That was the way to sort of get around it and then turn into it. But there's a different way, and I wonder how applicable that might be. Of the top five, last but certainly not least, Cheyanne Vlismas taking on Mallory Martin. Cheyanne wins via unanimous decision. She had won 30-27, 229-28. I'm not sure which one they gave to her as the round for Mallory Martin. Tough run for her. This was a great performance from Cheyanne Vlismas. This was a great performance. Great lateral movement. Very, very, very strong, consistent, well-applied footwork from Cheyanne Vlismas in this fight. Pay attention, man. She is never, for very long, standing in front of Mallory Martin. Not long at all. And she had a ton of stuff for her, whether it was jabs and crosses, jab cross hooks, jab uppercut, you name it. Mallory Martin could just never get a beat on her. Cheyanne Vlismas was in, she was out, she was L-stepping, she was circling out, she was going left, she was going right. She was striking and then exiting on a certain angle. She was striking and exiting at a different angle. She would parry the jab from Martin. She would meet her with body kicks, constantly inside leg kicker to disrupt. I mean, it was just a great showcase in two things. One, the footwork of Vlismas to really put her all over the octagon, just this constant moving target. And I think, too, Mallory Martin was looking to get a little bit of rhythm going, a little bit of setting of, this is sort of established pace and set roles in a fight. And Vlismas never let her, constantly moving, constantly disrupting her. Even if the jab, didn't land that much, it would force this reset from Martin. And, I talked to, briefly, just over text, basically, one of Martin's coaches. She trained hard for this fight, 15 weeks, man. It was just that Vlismas was just operating. She was doing a really, really good job. She had that one kind of hiccup against Montserrat Conejo. I believe that was her name, right? Who did she lose to in that one contest that was kind of ugly? Yeah, no, Montserrat Ruiz, excuse me. And but since then, she has, looked really good. She won on Contender Series. She's had 2 wins now in the UFC. Now, she hasn't had a win over a really, really established name, but I think that's probably coming down the line here when you turn in a performance like that. That was great. She should be really happy with that one. I was very, very impressed. That, again, and you'll see it too. You'll see people incorporate good footwork for like a round and a half, and then they get a little tired and they start moving a little bit less and blah, blah, blah. And this happens even at elite levels, and it didn't happen this time. Vlismas was on her game from the beginning bell to the end of it, and the footwork and the rhythm disruption, Martin could just never get going. I feel bad for Martin, man. She's a hard-trained, well-schooled fighter. She does have a win in the UFC, but not a win over, somebody with an established name or record, and a record dropped to 7-5 with this one. So, bit of a tough run, but I just love the ability to fight a disciplined game over the course of 3 rounds, especially when you have what I would still classify as a junior fighter in terms of their overall development and, their professional ambition. Cheyanne Vlismas, as good as she looked here, still has a long way to go. I think that would be a fair comment to make. This was great. Very strong from her. Now, a couple of you might be asking, why didn't you pick the knee bar that happened on the prelims? That fight wasn't super interesting to me. There was the good win from Dushko Todorovic. That's fine. Alex Moreno getting a win over Mickey Gall. We had talked about this on MK previously, where both guys have been in the UFC for about the same amount of time. Moreno just really grown a lot more. I would give some honorable mentions, though, to Clay Guida's win over Leonardo Santos. Now, Santos gassed maybe in the first round of this fight. It's funny. You had Jacare getting submitted this year. You had Leonardo Santos getting submitted this year. I think there's been some other high-level black belts that you couldn't even fathom them getting submitted, and they all got submitted this year. When you see someone like a Nogueira or a Leonardo Santos or Jacare getting submitted, in the case of Jacare, getting his arm broken at the same time, that's usually your call to be like, okay, they might need to hang it up. Jacare, I think, was 41 when he got his arm broken. How old is Leonardo Santos? He might be older than me, bro. He's old. Not quite. A little bit younger, but you get the point. 41. There's just something that happens to them where their cardio falls off, their submission defense falls off, the new, it's the passage of time. But when those guys are even post-prime, they are not getting submitted. But when they get post-prime, well, then bad things start to happen. Clay Guida, obviously, not going to say he's fresh as a daisy either. It's a nice win, dude. Anytime you submit a black belt, don't misunderstand me. He got it. He got the job done. He deserves to get, his flowers. But it just can't be argued that Leonardo Santos is in the peak of his career. He is far past it, and still makes him a dangerous threat. But when you start seeing Leonardo Santos and Jacare and some other ones get submitted, that's usually a sign that some bad things are happening for him. Obviously, Jamal Hill getting a great win over Jimmy Crute at the same time. It was just weird because it came so easy for Hill. He's got great hand speed. He found that right hook that sat Crute down pretty easily. I didn't have a whole lot to say about it. But so a couple of the things I wanted to mention here. Obviously, with Clay Guida getting the win over Leonardo Santos. Buchecha scoring a rear naked choke win at 1 over the weekend, I think on a Friday, against Kang Ji Wong. Came rather easily. This is part of the development process of Buchecha in MMA. So, not a huge thing to admire, but, keep an eye on Buchecha and see what he can do in MMA. He is going to be a force to be reckoned with on the mat as long as he keeps it there. All right, so what did I miss? What was your favorite fight of the weekend? Thumbs up in the video, hit subscribe, and then leave a message in the comments. What was the big fight to you, and what was the big reason it stood out to you? What did you like about it? Let me know, all right? That is it for me for Morning Kombat Extra Credit, Episode 9. I will see y'all next week.